The reward was one alien woman, until the human changed the rules. Alliances were fragile, battles brutal, and the casualties countless. Humanity had only recently entered this interstellar stage, but despite being newcomers, humans had something unique, the ability to think in ways that no other species did. That ability had brought them here, to the center of a celebration that was supposed to honor victory. Commander Elias Ward stood on the polished floor of the Great Hall, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. He was tall, with a sturdy frame honed by years of rigorous training on Earth and beyond. His uniform was simple, functional, with the insignia of the United Earth Coalition stitched above his heart. Around him, the alien dignitaries were draped in their traditional robes, feathers, and glowing ornaments. Some had tentacles, some scales, some wings, each species distinct, each species proud. The humans had learned to respect them, but respect was never enough to survive in such a place. Humans had to be clever, bold, and above all, unpredictable. The hall was filled with a quiet tension. Elias had been summoned to receive what the Coalition called a symbolic reward. The concept was foreign to him, though not entirely unknown. Across the galaxy, cultures had their customs for recognizing victories, but this one seemed off. The victorious party was often given the choice of selecting someone from the defeated group as a token. In some cases, it was a scientist, an artist, or a historian. In other cases, it was a warrior. The exact reason was never explained beyond tradition, but it was always assumed that the victor would accept. Refusing was unheard of. Elias had been briefed, but hearing it in the hall made it feel different, heavier. He had saved millions of lives by devising a strategy that ended the war quickly, and humanity had been hailed as heroes. The Coalition had expected gratitude, a smile, perhaps even pride. Instead, Elias felt a discomfort he could not ignore. The door at the far end of the hall opened and she entered. She moved with grace, but there was a strength beneath it that demanded attention. Her skin was a soft, shimmering tone called omega, and her eyes held a depth that spoke of both intelligence and suffering. She wore garments of her culture, simple yet elegant, and though she looked calm, Elias could sense the tension radiating from her. Every movement was measured, as if she had learned to survive by predicting others' expectations. The hall seemed to hold its breath. This was the moment the Coalition had anticipated for centuries. The human would claim the reward. But Elias did not move forward. He did not bow, nor did he speak. He studied her carefully, seeing not a symbol, not a prize, but a being, a person with thoughts, feelings, and history. The room shifted uncomfortably at his hesitation. Aliens whispered among themselves, their voices low but urgent. Finally, Elias spoke. His voice carried across the hall, clear and steady. "I cannot accept this," he said. There was a pause so long that some thought they had misheard. "I will not accept a person as a reward. Not now, not ever. She is not an object. She is a sentient being, and I will treat her as such." Shock rippled through the room. No species had ever rejected this custom. Some of the dignitaries bristled. One of the winged leaders, his feathers bristling with indignation, leaned forward. "You are human," he said sharply. "You do not understand our ways. To refuse is disrespect. Are you so arrogant as to think you can rewrite centuries of tradition in one word?" Elias met his gaze evenly. "I understand your tradition. But I also understand something more important. Sentience cannot be traded. Power must not be measured by control over others. If your tradition values a life as a reward, then your victory is empty. If you measure honor by taking what you cannot give freely, then your laws are flawed." The hall went silent. A historian from another species, with scales that shimmered like molten metal, whispered to his neighbor. Elias noticed her watching him. She was observing more than the words. She was analyzing the intent, the character behind the decision. In that instant, he realized she was no ordinary reward. She was clever, capable, and perhaps as strategic as any human commander. The coalition leader, an enormous being whose body seemed to be composed of stone and metal fused together, rose from his seat. "Explain yourself, human," he rumbled. "Do you reject all customs, or do you pick and choose which laws suit you?" Elias did not falter. "I reject the law that allows a life to be given as property. I accept all other customs, all other rules that respect life and freedom. My choice is simple. I will not participate in something that diminishes another being." Murmurs spread like fire. Some aliens were intrigued, others outraged. Elias had expected this reaction, but he did not flinch. He had not come here to play politics. He had come to act according to principle. The alien woman stepped forward, her voice soft but firm, carrying clearly in the hall. "I am not an object," she said. "I am not a reward. I am a historian of my people. I have lived through the consequences of war, and I see now that your species, your human species, measures victory differently. You measure it by conscience, not conquest. That is remarkable." The words hung in the air. Elias felt a strange sense of relief. She understood him, but relief was only the beginning. The hall remained tense, and the leaders were whispering urgently to one another. Some of them had never seen humans act this way, and it challenged everything they thought they knew. The winged leader folded his feathers and fixed Elias with a glare. "And if you refuse, what do you intend to do? Walk out and leave us to wonder what is to become of our tradition?" Elias took a measured step forward. "I intend to show you a better way. If you truly value honor, if you truly value peace, then the lives of your people cannot be bargaining chips. I am not here to disrespect your tradition, but I am here to redefine it with you. Together, we can create a system that honors victory without harming those who have already suffered." The room was silent again. The coalition leader's heavy, stone-like form seemed to tremble with indecision. "And you expect us to follow your human morality?" he asked. "No," Elias said. "I expect you to recognize that some rules are outdated, some customs are cruel. I expect you to consider that a victory built on freedom and dignity will last longer than a victory built on fear." The alien woman looked at him with a faint smile. She moved closer, carefully, but with purpose. "You are bold, human. Few would dare speak to the council this way. Few would refuse the reward. Few would think of others above themselves. Perhaps your species has much to teach us." That simple acknowledgement shifted something in the hall. Whispers grew louder, some anxious, some approving. The older, more conservative leaders were stiff and cautious. The younger, more curious ones leaned in, eager to understand. A debate had begun, and it was entirely new. Elias stayed silent after that, letting the words sink in. He could feel the weight of expectation, but he did not sway. The alien woman remained beside him, not as a prize, but as an equal observer of the unfolding moment. Together, they symbolized a possibility that the galaxy had never seen: cooperation based on principle, not tradition. Outside the hall, the city was alive with activity. Ships of countless designs moved through the skyways, each carrying cargo, diplomats, or refugees. The war had left scars, but it had also opened opportunities. Elias could see the possibilities, the rebuilding, the treaties, the alliances that could prevent such destruction in the future. He felt the responsibility keenly. Human life had a value beyond victory, and now, it seemed, so did the lives of those they had once considered defeated. As the council continued their debate, Elias allowed himself a quiet thought. Change was never easy. It was never quick. But in that hall, with the alien woman at his side, he had made the first move. He had refused to accept a life as a token of success, and in doing so, he had sparked something that might ripple through the galaxy. The alien woman turned to him, her eyes reflecting curiosity and respect. "What will you do next, human?" she asked. Elias looked at her, then back at the council. "Next," he said, "we teach them that victory without justice is no victory at all." We show them that the measure of a species is not in how many lives it can take, but in how many it can protect. And in that moment, the first seeds of something new were planted. The hall, once filled with expectation and fear, now held a cautious hope. The galaxy had witnessed something it had never seen before, a human refusing what was considered sacred tradition, and in that refusal, creating the possibility of a future built not on dominance, but on principle. Elias knew the path ahead would be difficult. There would be resistance, misunderstanding, and perhaps hostility. But he also knew this. Humanity's strength lay not just in courage or strategy, but in conscience. And conscience, wielded with wisdom and patience, had the power to change the rules themselves. As the council adjourned, some leaders in quiet conversation, some visibly disturbed, Elias and the alien woman stepped outside. The city stretched beneath them, a tapestry of cultures, technologies, and possibilities. The war had ended, but the real work, the work of shaping a galaxy that could live in peace, was only beginning. And in that beginning, the reward was not a prize, not a token, not a person. The reward was the choice to do what was right, even when no one expected it. And that choice, Elias understood, would echo far beyond that hall, far beyond that city, and perhaps far beyond the stars themselves. The council's chambers emptied slowly, leaving behind an air thick with tension. Outside, the alien delegates moved in clusters, whispering urgently, exchanging glances filled with disbelief or curiosity. The winged leader, still fuming, flapped his feathers sharply and strode toward the exit, muttering phrases that made his companions nod uneasily. The room that had only moments before felt ceremonial and grand now felt heavy with uncertainty. Elias Ward remained in the center, his posture calm, his gaze steady. Beside him, the alien woman, whose name he had not yet learned, walked with quiet confidence, her hands folded loosely in front of her. "Why did you speak for me?" she asked softly, her voice carrying the precision of someone trained in careful speech. "I could have managed my own words." Elias shrugged slightly. "Because the message matters more than pride," he said. "You could have spoken, yes, but the council was ready to hear from me. Sometimes it takes one voice to change many." She studied him, her eyes sharp and calculating. "And what do you hope to change, human? Traditions centuries old cannot be undone overnight. Even your species did not rise by defying every rule." "True," Elias said. "But the galaxy has learned to respect humanity not for our rebellion but for our principles. We do not conquer for gain. We do not enslave. We win battles by thinking ahead, by protecting lives, by valuing conscience above convenience." She nodded slowly, as if weighing his words carefully. "Perhaps that is why your people survived when others fell." For a moment, silence hung between them. The air outside the chambers was alive with the distant hum of ships, mechanical engines, and the quiet chatter of citizens. War had left scars, but it had also opened opportunities. Elias could feel the tension of history pressing against him, the weight of expectation, and yet he felt a clarity he had rarely experienced in his life. "I have a name," she said suddenly, as if deciding something. "I am Liara T. Vash." Elias nodded. "Commander Elias Ward." "It is a pleasure to meet you, Liara, not as a reward, not as a symbol, but as a person." She allowed herself a brief smile. "Few humans have spoken like that in my lifetime. Most see us as obstacles, enemies, or tools. You see me as equal." "That is because you are equal," Elias replied simply. The moment of connection, however, was interrupted by a sudden call from the council chambers. One of the junior delegates, a thin-skinned species with a translucent membrane across its shoulders, approached quickly. "Commander Ward, Liara, you must come with us. The council requires a response to your statements. Some members are preparing to impose sanctions. Human arrogance is being cited." Elias exhaled slowly. He had anticipated resistance, but the speed at which it had arisen surprised him. "Very well," he said. "Lead the way." The corridor beyond the chamber was wide and bright, lined with reflective surfaces that showcased the city outside. Elias and Liara followed, their steps measured, as delegates whispered in languages Elias did not know. He noticed the occasional glare aimed at him, sharp enough to feel as a physical pressure. He did not flinch. Humanity had survived worse. When they arrived at the council assembly, the chamber was already in uproar. Several of the more conservative leaders had taken the floor, their voices sharp and accusing. "This human believes he can redefine tradition," shouted the winged leader, his feathers bristling. "He dares reject the sacred custom of honoring the victors with a token from the defeated. Such arrogance cannot be tolerated." The stone-like coalition leader, who had earlier questioned Elias, rose, his massive frame looming over the room. "Enough," he rumbled. "This is not a simple matter of arrogance. If the human is allowed to dictate terms, the balance of our society may be disrupted. The council requires an immediate proposal for resolution." Elias stepped forward. He could feel every eye in the room upon him, some skeptical, some curious. "You are correct," he said. "I cannot dictate terms, but I can propose a solution. If the goal is honor, respect, and peace, then the measure of victory must be based on protection, rebuilding, and cooperation, not on taking lives or possessions. Let the reward be a shared responsibility. Rebuild the worlds torn by war, share knowledge, and ensure that no sentient being is treated as a prize. That is the true path to lasting peace." The chamber fell silent. It was as if the weight of the words pressed against the walls themselves. The concept was simple but radical. Many had never thought of victory in such a way. Victory had always been a display of power, a demonstration that one species was superior. To suggest otherwise was heresy, but compelling heresy. Liara stepped forward beside him. "Commander Ward is right," she said. "Our people suffered greatly. Tradition demanded that a life be given, thinking it would preserve the rest. But we see now that no tradition can honor peace if it sacrifices freedom. If the Council truly wishes to end the cycle of war, it must consider principles above ritual." The reaction was immediate. Some leaders murmured agreement, their voices small but undeniable. Others hissed in disapproval, their postures rigid and defensive. The winged leader flared his feathers in visible anger, while the stone-like leader's eyes narrowed, deep crevices forming across his stony surface. "Are you asking the council to abandon our laws entirely?" demanded a scaled elder from the back of the chamber. "You are asking us to ignore centuries of wisdom. Our ancestors built civilizations on these traditions, and now a human tells us to throw them away." "No," Elias replied evenly. "I am asking you to evolve them. Wisdom is not static, it grows. Laws and customs are meant to serve life, not diminish it. If a rule harms, it must be questioned. If a law demands cruelty, it must be rewritten. That is the measure of true civilization." There was a long pause. Even the whispering delegates had gone quiet, sensing that this moment was unlike any other in their lifetimes. Slowly, the younger leaders began nodding, their expressions thoughtful. It was clear that many were considering the idea seriously, though fear and tradition still held them back. One voice rose, hesitant but clear. "And what of the reward itself?" asked a diplomat with delicate, wing-like appendages. "If we cannot offer a life as a token, what do we give instead?" Elias smiled faintly. "Give what matters: knowledge, protection, shared effort. Let the victors help rebuild the worlds they have fought over. Let the defeated teach what they have learned. Let respect and cooperation become the currency of victory, not lives taken or given. That is a reward worth honoring." Liara's eyes met his, and for a moment the chamber seemed to fade away. She nodded subtly. "Yes," she said softly. "Let this be a reward of wisdom, not possession." The murmurs in the chamber grew louder. Some alien leaders were visibly troubled by the radical idea, but others leaned forward, intrigued. The debate began, and this time it was not just tradition versus humanity. It was the future of how species interacted, how power was exercised, and how honor could be measured without harming others. After hours of discussion, the council decided on a temporary compromise. The alien woman, Liara, would remain free. She would act as a mediator and historian, offering insight into the defeated cultures and guiding reconstruction. Elias and other human representatives would assist her in coordinating relief and rebuilding efforts. The old ritual of offering a life as a reward was suspended for further review. Elias felt a quiet satisfaction, but he did not celebrate. He knew that this was only the beginning. Traditions, especially those tied to power, were difficult to change. Resistance would continue and some would work to undermine the new system. Yet the first step had been taken, and in that step lay hope. Outside the council chambers, the city was alive with movement. Ships soared overhead, some carrying supplies for reconstruction, others filled with delegates and traders. The streets were crowded with beings of all shapes and sizes, from fur-covered creatures to amphibious species, from winged travelers to scaled elders. Humanity's reputation as a principled species had begun to spread, and even those who did not fully understand Elia's stance felt a cautious respect. Liara walked beside him, her posture relaxed now, but her gaze still sharp. "Do you think they will follow through?" she asked. "Some will resist, some will resent your interference." "They will follow through," Elias replied calmly. "Not all at first, but actions speak louder than words. If they see a human fighting for principle, not profit, they will eventually understand. Change rarely happens instantly, but it happens if it is inevitable." Liara considered this, then nodded. "Perhaps your people are right. Victory without compassion is hollow. Perhaps the galaxy needs more humans to remind us of that." Elias smiled faintly. "Perhaps. But it is not just humans. It is anyone who values life and conscience. Humanity is only one example. Others will follow if they see the right path." The sun of the planet was setting, casting long, golden beams across the cityscape. It reflected on the polished surfaces of buildings, on the wings, scales, and skin of the diverse beings moving below. Elias felt a sense of clarity he had rarely experienced. The war was over, but the real work, building a galaxy that valued life, freedom, and principle, was only beginning. And in that work he was not alone. Liara was by his side, not as a reward, not as a token, but as a partner in thought and action. Together they would face the challenges ahead: skeptical leaders, lingering hostilities, and the complex task of changing centuries-old traditions. As they walked, Elias allowed himself a quiet hope. Victory had been achieved through strategy and courage, but the future would be built through conscience, cooperation, and the courage to do what was right even when no one demanded it. The first seeds had been sown, and the galaxy had witnessed something new: the possibility that power guided by principle could reshape the rules of history. And for the first time, Elias understood that the true reward of victory was not control, not symbols, and not wealth. The true reward was the ability to choose justice, to protect life, and to inspire others to do the same. That reward, he knew, could change the galaxy forever. The days after the council meeting were filled with tension, planning, and cautious optimism. Elias Ward had quickly learned that changing centuries of tradition was not merely a matter of words. It required action, demonstration, and, above all, patience. The coalition leaders had agreed, in theory, to suspend the practice of offering a life as a reward, but in practice, many were skeptical. Some whispered behind closed doors that humans were naive. Others feared that the momentary shift in tradition would undermine their authority, allowing defeated factions to rise too quickly. Elias, however, was not daunted. He had faced far greater threats on the battlefield, and he understood that the first step toward lasting change was to show that his principles could succeed in reality, not just in theory. Liara Tivash, the historian and mediator, had quickly become an indispensable partner. She understood her people, their fears, and their potential, and she provided insights into the customs and expectations of every faction involved. One morning, Elias and Liara convened a meeting with several younger leaders who had shown interest in reform. They gathered in a bright chamber overlooking the city, its walls lined with screens displaying maps, population data, and economic statistics. Our first challenge, Elias began, pointing at the display, is not enforcing new laws. It is demonstrating that cooperation yields tangible results. We need to protect lives, rebuild infrastructure, and show that victories can create growth rather than suffering. That will speak louder than any speech. Liara nodded, adding, "We must also involve the citizens. If they see tangible benefits, they will support the change. If we rely only on the council, resistance will grow. People respect results more than rhetoric." Plans were quickly set into motion. The coalition had several neutral worlds that had suffered from the war. Elias proposed starting with one of them, a city that had once been a trading hub, now reduced to rubble. Humans, Liara's people, and several allied factions would work together to stabilize the city, provide food and medical care, and begin rebuilding essential infrastructure. The first day in the city was chaotic. The streets were crowded with civilians, some desperate, some wary, and others curious. Buildings leaned precariously, smoke drifted from scattered fires, and the echoes of distant explosions reminded everyone of what had been lost. Elias moved through the city with a calm purpose, assessing damage, coordinating efforts, and listening to both citizens and coalition leaders. Liara accompanied him, directing historians and cultural experts to document the rebuilding process and ensure that the needs of the survivors were understood. She had a sharp eye for detail, noticing where traditions conflicted with the practicalities of survival. In one instance, a group of locals insisted that certain resources should be distributed according to age and rank, in accordance with custom. Elias and Liara patiently explained that immediate survival required flexibility, and gradually, the group adapted. By evening, small victories were visible. Water purification systems were repaired, food distribution points were established, and medical stations treated hundreds of injured and ill citizens. The coalition leaders present began to notice the effectiveness of the human-led effort. Whispers of approval began to replace murmurs of doubt. One evening, as Elias and Liara walked through a partially restored street, Liara spoke quietly. "Do you see how they watch us?" she asked. "Not just the council members, but everyone. They are learning that strength can be used to protect, not to dominate. That is a lesson they will carry longer than any law." Elias nodded. "It is one thing to speak of principle, Liara. It is another to show it in action. This is how change spreads. People follow example more readily than command." As days turned into weeks, the city began to show remarkable recovery. What had seemed like impossible damage slowly transformed into signs of hope. Schools reopened, markets began to function, and cultural festivals resumed in small, cautious ways. The coalition leaders documented the progress, unable to deny that the human-led principles were effective. However, the work was not without danger. A faction of pirates, emboldened by the disruption of old rules, saw an opportunity. They believed that the weakening of the tradition would leave valuable cities undefended. One night, they attacked a neighboring neutral world with swift strikes on key installations. Elias received the report immediately. He convened an emergency council with Liara and several coalition leaders. "We cannot wait for them to strike again," he said firmly. "We need to respond quickly, decisively, but in a way that demonstrates our principles. We cannot simply retaliate with violence for its own sake." Liara suggested a strategy. "We use intelligence and coordination. Our goal is to protect civilians and critical infrastructure, not to annihilate them. If we can neutralize the threat without unnecessary destruction, the coalition will see that we are capable of both strength and restraint. The plan was set. Human engineers, military units, and coalition forces coordinated a swift, precise operation. Using a combination of surveillance drones, communication intercepts, and carefully calculated maneuvers, they intercepted the pirate forces before they could cause widespread harm. The engagement was tense. Pirates attempted to exploit weaknesses, but Elia's strategy anticipated their movements. Liara coordinated civilian evacuations, ensuring that no innocent lives were lost. The pirates, surprised by the effectiveness of a disciplined and humane response, were captured rather than killed. Their ships were secured, and critical supplies were restored to the local population. The success had a profound effect. News of the operation spread quickly across the galaxy. Humans were not only capable of defeating a threat, but could do so without unnecessary cruelty. Liara's documentation highlighted the principles in action: the preservation of life, the protection of culture, and the strategic use of power for good. Back in the Coalition Council, leaders convened to discuss the implications. The winged leader, who had previously been one of the most vocal opponents of Elia's, spoke first. "I underestimated the human approach," he admitted. "We relied on fear and ritual to maintain order, but this is a different kind of strength. One that commands respect without demanding it." The stone-like leader nodded slowly. "It is evident that human principles can achieve what centuries of tradition could not. We must reconsider our customs carefully." Elias addressed the council once more. "Change is difficult. Resistance is natural, but the results speak for themselves. Victory is not measured by conquest alone. It is measured by the lives protected, the societies rebuilt, and the trust earned. If the coalition adopts these principles, the galaxy will benefit far more than it has in centuries." Liara stood beside him, her voice calm but firm. "The results are visible. Communities that once feared us now cooperate with us. Children are returning to schools, markets are functioning, and cultures that were on the brink of collapse are beginning to heal. Principles, not punishment, are restoring order." The council deliberated for hours. Eventually, a new motion was passed. The traditional practice of offering a life as a reward would be formally reviewed, with a focus on creating alternative systems that emphasized cooperation, mutual aid, and preservation of life. Human representatives and Liara would assist in drafting these new regulations. Outside the council chambers, citizens and leaders alike began to recognize the impact of human-led action. Small groups of civilians began to organize reconstruction efforts without waiting for orders, inspired by the demonstration of principles in practice. Children carried supplies to aid stations, traders reopened their shops, and medical teams established permanent clinics. Even some former combatants from defeated factions volunteered, seeing that survival and prosperity could be earned through cooperation rather than submission. In one instance, Elias and Liara visited a newly rebuilt market. Merchants of various species interacted freely, exchanging goods, knowledge, and stories. A young trader approached Elias, eyes wide with curiosity. "Human," he asked, "how did your species learn to act this way, to value life over victory?" Elias smiled. "It is a choice," he said simply. "Every day, every action is a choice. We could conquer and dominate, but we choose to protect and collaborate. That is the strength that guides us." Liara observed quietly, then added, "And now, you see, that choice inspires others." That is how change spreads, not through force but through example. Despite the progress, Elias remained vigilant. He knew that some leaders still harbored doubts, and other factions might try to exploit hesitation or uncertainty. Yet he also knew that the demonstration of principle in action had shifted the balance irreversibly. The coalition had witnessed a new model of leadership, one that combined intelligence, strategy, and morality. The sun was setting over the city, casting long shadows and painting the sky with colors that no human could have imagined. Elias stood at the top of a reconstructed building, looking out over the bustling streets below. Liara joined him, her expression thoughtful. "You have changed more than the council, human," she said softly. "You have changed how they see themselves. That is no small feat." Elias nodded. "It is only the beginning. The galaxy is vast and there are many who will resist, many who will cling to old ways. But if even a few see that strength can be guided by conscience, the ripple will continue." Liara smiled faintly. "Then we continue, together." And so they did. Day after day, operation after operation, they worked to show that victories could be meaningful, that power could be wielded responsibly, and that a single species guided by conscience could inspire an entire galaxy to reconsider its values. They faced challenges, navigated political tensions, and confronted threats, but with each success, they proved that humanity's principles were not naive ideals. They were strategies for survival and prosperity, stronger than any weapon or ritual. As the stars began to appear over the horizon, Elias realized something profound. The true power of a species was not in its ability to take, but in its ability to protect. The galaxy had witnessed the demonstration, and the first ripple of lasting change had begun. Victory had been won on the battlefield, yes, but the real test, the test of principle, strategy, and moral strength, was far from over. And Elias, with Liara at his side, was ready to meet it. The weeks that followed were unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Elias Ward and Liara Tivash traveled from system to system, guiding efforts to rebuild, mediate disputes, and demonstrate the strength of human principles. What had started as a single act of defiance in a council hall had now become a movement of example, one that showed that power could be used to protect rather than dominate, to heal rather than harm. Each planet had its own challenges. On some worlds, the scars of war were so deep that even hope seemed impossible to find. Entire cities lay in ruins, populations scattered, and cultural artifacts lost. On others, tensions between factions threatened to ignite new conflicts at the slightest provocation. Elias' role was not just to provide strategy and leadership. It was to show that humanity's unique approach could succeed where tradition and force had failed. On a desert world that had once been a thriving mining hub, Elias and Liara coordinated the construction of water purification systems. The planet's soil had been poisoned by years of conflict, and survivors struggled to find clean water. Coalition engineers and human specialists worked alongside locals, teaching them how to maintain the systems and ensuring that knowledge would remain after they left. Children learned quickly, showing a natural curiosity and adaptability that filled Elias with quiet satisfaction. "This is more than infrastructure," Liara said as she watched a group of children operate a water pump with care and understanding. "It is education. You are not only saving lives, human, you are giving them tools to survive and thrive. That is the real reward." Elias nodded. True change does not come from fear or coercion. It comes from knowledge, understanding, and the opportunity to act. The more they learn, the stronger they become. And the stronger they are, the less anyone can exploit them. As the coalition watched, it became increasingly clear that Elias' methods were effective. Leaders who had once scoffed at human ideals began to take notes, asking questions, observing carefully, and sending their own envoys to assist. Even the winged leader, who had initially opposed Elias so strongly, approached him cautiously one day in a sunlit courtyard. "You have proven that strength need not demand submission," the leader said, his feathers ruffling in the gentle breeze. "I doubted your people, your methods, but I see now that there is power in your way. Perhaps we have been blind for too long." Elias inclined his head. "It is not just humans who can achieve this. Any species willing to protect life, respect freedom, and act with conscience can do the same, but it must be demonstrated, not just discussed. That is what we are doing together. Even as progress spread, challenges arose. Some factions attempted to exploit the disruption of tradition, believing that the suspension of the reward custom signaled weakness. Raiders struck at small settlements, attempting to seize resources and intimidate survivors. But Elias and Liara faced each incident with precision and care. Military units were deployed not to punish indiscriminately, but to protect. Civilians were evacuated, critical infrastructure safeguarded, and captured raiders were treated humanely, then reintegrated into the rebuilding process whenever possible. The results were astonishing. Communities began to rebuild not just physically, but socially and politically. Former enemies collaborated to repair what had been destroyed. Schools reopened, marketplaces thrived, and cultural festivals resumed. Knowledge was shared freely between factions, fostering understanding and breaking down centuries of suspicion and resentment. Elias realized that this was the true test of principle, not simply speaking words of morality, but creating tangible results that demonstrated the power of ethical action. Each victory reinforced the idea that strength guided by conscience could achieve far more than violence alone. One evening, on a quiet hill overlooking a rebuilt city, Elias and Liara watched the sunset. The sky was a vivid display of colors, streaked with golds, reds, and purples. Children ran through the streets below, laughing as merchants called out the day's goods, and citizens moved with confidence and purpose. The transformation was remarkable. "They will never forget this, will they?" Liara asked softly. "Not just the council, but the people. They have witnessed what is possible when power is used wisely." "They will remember," Elias replied, "and they will pass it on." Change spreads faster than war when it is rooted in principle and action. What we do now will echo far longer than any battle victory. In the weeks that followed, the coalition formally adopted new regulations, replacing the old reward system with one focused on shared responsibility and cooperative rebuilding. Human representatives, led by Elias, were appointed to monitor the implementation and ensure that the principles of protection, freedom, and respect were followed. Liara became an ambassador for her people, not as a reward or symbol, but as a trusted partner in governance and diplomacy. Even factions that had initially resisted the change began to participate voluntarily. They saw that collaboration brought tangible benefits, trade, security, and stability that had eluded them for generations. The galaxy began to witness a remarkable shift. Where once the cycle of conquest and retaliation had defined interstellar relations, now there was a model that emphasized collaboration, foresight, and moral responsibility. During one council session, Elias addressed a full assembly of leaders from dozens of species. The chamber, once tense with skepticism, was now filled with representatives eager to understand, learn, and participate. "We have achieved more than victory," he said. "We have demonstrated that power guided by conscience is stronger than power guided by fear. We have shown that principles can protect lives, foster understanding, and create a future worth fighting for. The galaxy now has a choice: continue the cycle of domination or embrace the possibility of cooperation and progress. The choice is ours, but the results will speak for themselves." Liara stood beside him, her expression calm but resolute. "And remember," she added, "the real reward is not honor, not symbols, and not wealth. The real reward is the chance to protect life, to foster knowledge, and to inspire others to act with conscience. That is a reward worth more than any other." The council deliberated, but the decision was unanimous. The practice of offering a sentient being as a reward was permanently abolished. In its place, a system of collaborative reconstruction, knowledge sharing, and mutual protection was established. The coalition declared that any species who violated these principles would face collective sanctions, ensuring that ethical governance was not only encouraged but enforced. The success spread rapidly across the galaxy. Other worlds, seeing the results, began to adopt similar practices. Communities that had once feared alien dominance now worked alongside former enemies. Education programs expanded, trade flourished, and cultural exchanges brought a sense of unity that had been absent for centuries. Human principles, demonstrated through action, had reshaped not just laws, but the values of countless civilizations. Elias and Liara continued their work, but they also took moments to observe the impact of their efforts. On one world, a group of young students built a community center with guidance from both human and alien engineers. On another, a market reopened where traders of different species collaborated for the first time. Everywhere they went, they witnessed small acts of cooperation that grew into larger movements, proof that change, once initiated, could spread organically. One evening, on a quiet terrace overlooking a restored city, Elias reflected on the journey. The war had ended, yes, but the real victory had been harder to achieve. It was not a matter of strategy alone or strength alone. It was the courage to act according to principle, even when no one expected it. The galaxy had watched, learned, and adapted. Human ideals had not been imposed, they had been demonstrated. That demonstration had inspired others to follow willingly, ensuring that the change would endure. Liara joined him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the city below. "You have changed more than laws, Elias," she said quietly. "You have changed hearts. The galaxy will remember this. Your people will be remembered not just for victory, but for morality, for vision, for leadership." Elias shook his head slightly. "It was not just me. It was the people who chose to act rightly, who chose to cooperate rather than dominate. Humanity has a voice, but the galaxy itself carried the message forward. Principles alone cannot change the world. Actions must follow. And now they have followed." As the stars rose above, glittering in the night sky, Elias felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. The Council, the Coalition, and the galaxy at large had witnessed something extraordinary. The power of a species guided by conscience. The old traditions of dominance and reward had been challenged and replaced with systems that valued life, freedom, and cooperation. The ripple of change was spreading, faster and stronger than any weapon could have achieved. The reward, which had once been symbolized by a life, had transformed into something far greater. It was the reward of choice, of moral courage, of the ability to inspire others through example. Elias understood now that this was the kind of victory worth striving for, a victory that could shape the galaxy for generations. Liara turned to him one last time, a faint smile playing on her lips. "The galaxy has changed, Elias, and it began with you refusing to accept what should never have been offered." Elias nodded, watching the lights of the city below, feeling a sense of hope stronger than any he had known. "The galaxy will continue to change, Liara, and with every step guided by conscience, it will become stronger, wiser, and better. That is the true reward of victory." And in that moment, as stars shone above and the city thrived below, Elias understood the full scope of what had been achieved. Humanity had not only survived in a vast and complex galaxy, it had shown that courage, intelligence, and moral principle could reshape history itself. The war was over, but the era of conscious, principled leadership had only just begun. And the galaxy, once fractured and divided, now had the chance to unite not through fear or dominance, but through choice, action, and the enduring power of. The reward was one alien woman, until the human changed